Number 1. The house. Trick-or-treating when I was growing up is a lot different than most people experienced, whether that is today or even back then. We didn't go out walking and going from house to house. We lived very far out in the country on a really big ridge. The houses were not very close together, so it would have taken forever to walk house to house to go trick-or-treating, so we had to drive to each house. Now, most people were pretty religious in that area, but they weren't so bad that they didn't give out candy on Halloween. However, there were some people who were so deeply religious that they thought it was the devil's holiday, or some nonsense like that, and they would absolutely take no part in it whatsoever. Those people would either put a sign on their mailbox stating that they did not give out candy, or they would simply just turn all their lights out. Parents driving their children around would know this and just avoid those houses. For all of my early trick-or-treating experiences, my parents would drive us around. A few of my cousins would come along too, and we would have a good time all together. That went on that way for many years. The first time that my parents did not drive us to the trick-or-treating houses was when I was 12 years old. The reason behind this is that my older brother Ray had just gotten his driver's license. He'd also been gifted a very old pickup truck that many of my uncles had worked on, so he could have a vehicle for his birthday present. So my parents decided that Ray would be the one driving us to go trick-or-treating. At the time, Ray wanted to go out drinking with his buddies. I assumed that he wanted to go out drinking, but didn't know for sure. So he wasn't really happy about having to take us out. However, I think he thought that if he could get the trick-or-treating done with early, that he would be able to salvage part of the night and be able to go off with his friends. Ray did have one of his friends with him in the front cab of the truck, but I can't remember the name of the guy for some reason. So me, my other younger brother, and 3 of my cousins had to ride in the bed of the truck. We all thought that just made Halloween a lot scarier than it usually was. It was so dark out there on the ridge, and riding in the back of the truck like that made us so susceptible to any of the scary things that went bump in the night. So while we were driving around, we did our best to try and scare each other between stops. It was working, and we did get scared. But we were all okay with that because it was fun. No one was really trying to seriously scare one another. Most of the houses we went to, things went pretty routinely. We would pull up in the driveway of a house that had its lights on. Many times there would be Halloween decorations on the house or in the yard, which let us know that we were welcome there. Often there would be people sitting out on the porch, dressed warmly, waiting for children to come up to their house and get their candy. Those were the ones that we liked the best. However, when we came upon a house that had its lights out, my brother would just drive past them. It really didn't take very much time, though, to get tired of everything. He knew he had to keep us out, though, because if he brought us back early, my parents would be very mad at him and wouldn't let him take the truck out afterwards to do anything else. So although he couldn't take us home, I think he decided to find other ways for himself to have fun. Ray seemed to know what could possibly scare us, and so the next time he came to a house that had no lights on, he stopped and made as if he was going to turn into the driveway. He didn't really go, though. He just let the truck jerk a few times, as if he was going to turn, but he didn't. He asked us whether we should go and try that house out. We let him know that we didn't want to, since we weren't supposed to. That just scared us because we didn't want to get into any sort of altercation with the people who lived there. However, Ray kept pretending like he was going to turn in, just to see how we would react. And when he and his friend had finally had enough of teasing us about it, he just took off down the road again. We then visited a few accepting houses, until he implied once again that he was going to try to go for a house that had its lights out. However, after doing that maybe in a few different houses, we caught on that Ray wasn't ever going to go through with it. That is when we stopped responding in a way that he found satisfying. If you know teenage boys who like to torment younger kids, then you know they don't like it when their torments quit working. Well, Ray was not the type of person to let himself be defeated, so he decided to take it up a notch when he came across the next house that had lights out. This time he actually turned into the driveway. We still didn't react much because we were sure he wouldn't actually go too far down the drive. Not reacting was still getting to him though, and he wasn't backing down very easy. So eventually, when he didn't get the reactions that he wanted, he decided to really pull out all the stops and scare the crap out of us. The driveway of the darkened house was pretty long. It was almost like a road all its own, but we were not convinced he would go all the way up to the house. My younger brother was a bit concerned, but I tried to convince him that Ray was just messing with us. But Ray wasn't giving in. He kept driving closer and closer to the house, but he was also doing it deliberately slowly. The other kids were getting seriously freaked out, and I was doing my best to try and keep them as calm as possible. This was not easy though. Ray's friend was starting to make some spooky and scary noises, obviously trying to get the kids even more worked up than they already were. Me, I was just hoping that either no one was at home at that house, or that they wouldn't be too upset that we were approaching the house on Halloween. So my brother stopped a few car lanes away from the house, and he told us to get out of the truck and go up to the house. The younger kids didn't want to, and I definitely did not want to either, so I told Ray that the joke was over, that he had scared the kids enough, and that he should go ahead and pull out of the driveway. Ray was having none of it though. He kept insisting that we get out of the truck and go up to the house. He also said that until we did so, he wasn't going to leave, and he sounded like he meant it too. I kept telling him that he was going to get himself in trouble by doing this stuff when Mom and Dad found out, but that didn't seem to be deterring him at all. So I told him that finally if he left the other kids alone, I would go up to the house. I quietly crept out of the back of the truck. I was not looking forward to this. I knew that some of these people could be really cranky if you came up to their homes on Halloween night, but I kept hoping I was right when I told the kids that no one was home. So I crept up to the house, prepared to find out. By the time I got to the porch, a couple things happened at the same time. A light came on from the front porch. A big old guy opened the door and he was holding a knife in his hand, but he didn't look like he was trying to give me a friendly Halloween scare. He looked pissed. And he started yelling at me to take my demon worship somewhere else. I nearly fell but was able to catch myself and turn around. However, I guess Ray thought that it was funny or something, and he began driving out of the driveway. I had to turn and run as fast as I could, trying to catch up to the truck while he was peeling out. I had to try and not think of the guy on the porch with a knife possibly following me. Ray toyed with me a little bit before I was finally able to get a hand on the truck. Even then he sped up just a little bit, which could have caused me to fall off the truck. Fortunately though, that didn't happen. I was able to stabilize myself, and then finally pull myself back into the bed. When we drove off, I looked back and thought I saw the guy in the yard not far behind me. But by that point, Ray pulled quickly out of the driveway and then back on the road. He and his friend were laughing at me, but that laughing didn't last for very long. My younger brother was traumatized, and he told my father what Ray had done. Not only did he not get to take the truck out that night, he wasn't allowed to take it out for a long time afterward. Number 2. The Light. I lived in the same house for all of my childhood years. It was a very nice, 3-level house that was set in a country setting. It was a nice and beautiful area out in the hills. Our closest neighbor lived down the hill from us. Our dogs would often venture out to each other's houses or in the woods to play. But other than this, if you didn't know someone was coming over, such as a friend or family member, you never saw people hanging out in your yard or really around your house at all. Around the time that this story takes place, I got into the age that I didn't want to go out to trick-or-treat anymore. I figured I was too old for it, although I can't remember what my exact age at the time was. I still had younger siblings, however, but my parents still had to take out. So on this Halloween, I decided that I was going to stay home by myself. I liked hanging out in the dark when I was home by myself. Being that it was Halloween night just made this something I wanted to do even more. So I was absolutely hanging out at home in the dark watching some television. I was in the front room of the house, which faced out toward the road. We also had a really huge yard, and our house was in the middle of the yard. But there was still a lot of room around the yard, and it wasn't always easy to make out that anything was going on in or around the yard. I don't know what caught my eye first, but there was some sort of light coming from out in the yard. I noticed it when it seemed like it was moving. Although it was in the front yard, it was nowhere near the driveway, so whatever the light was, it must have come from out in the woods or something like that, and so I got interested. But what really got me interested was that it was moving. We didn't have any light outside, other than the porch and back porch lights, and those wouldn't be enough for me to make out what was going on that far away in the yard. So I got up and walked over to the window and was trying to check out and see what I was seeing. I went out on the porch to look around. I left the lights out though. Although I couldn't completely make out what was going on, there were obviously some people in the yard. I couldn't tell what was making the lights though, so I didn't know what to do, but I went and grabbed a rifle. I didn't want to take any chances of some sickos doing something out there to hurt someone on Halloween. Lord knows that is when some of these sorts of people like doing scary things, being Halloween. When I got into the yard and was going in that direction, I was able to hear some noises, and still see that there were some people out there. I called out, and I didn't know who they were, but I told them I had a gun on me, and that they better get out of my yard because I was not afraid to use it. Well, I could tell right away that they were carrying a jack-o'-lantern that looked like it had a devil carved into it. They dropped it on the ground when they noticed that I had indeed had a gun. There had to be about 3 people there. They turned and then took off by jumping over the fence and heading back out into the woods. When I got closer, I noticed I was right about the jack-o'-lantern. I opened it and put out the fire. Then, I'm not sure why I did this, but I shot the pumpkin. I didn't like the devil drawing it had carved into it. I turned and went back to the house. I didn't know who these people were, and I never found out who they were or what they wanted. But I cannot imagine that it was good in any way. Number 3. Trick or Treat. This is the story of something that happened to me when I was around 13 years old. My family lived in a relatively rural area. On Halloween, we had to drive to different little neighborhoods in order to do trick-or-treating. We didn't live in town, but we would drive in to do a little trick-or-treating there. We lived ourselves in an area that there were hills and dirt roads, especially no sidewalks. So out there we would have to drive the little ways to the next house. But while we were in town, we could walk over house to house like normal trick-or-treaters would be doing. My family was also pretty poor when I was growing up. I really wanted to be Freddy Krueger that year for Halloween. Of course, my family really couldn't afford to get me anything at all of a convincing costume, and the glove they were able to get me called a Night Stalker glove, and it was a simple black cloth glove with some paper-thin floppy blades on it. I knew that we didn't have money for anything better though, so I was happy about it. Now, when we were out of town, we were with our parents in a car, driving from house to house. But generally, when we got into town, we would be going by house to house by ourselves. For the most part, that was what we liked most. Our parents would let us go off on our own, and that was, for us, what trick-or-treating was all about. It was much nicer not being with your parents during that time. I was not a very large 13-year-old, but I was the oldest of the kids that were dropped off in town, so not only was I in charge, but I guess I was also supposed to protect the younger kids if I were able to. I didn't really see this coming into play, however, as we were just kids out having fun on trick-or-treat night. But something did happen as we approached one of the houses. There were some older kids hanging out on the porch. They looked like they may have been around 17 years old. Plus, they definitely didn't look like the nicest kids in the world either. Sorry to sound judgmental just by looking at a few people, but their behavior made me feel like I wanted to go ahead and skip that house. I didn't, though. When we were walking up to the house, I heard the boys making some remarks about our costumes. One seemed to notice my really cheap Freddy glove and costume and began making some remarks towards the cheapness of the costume. He also started saying things about how he hated Freddy Krueger and was much more of a Jason fan. This was the late 80s before the two of them fought each other in a movie, so there was still a strong rivalry between fans of the two franchises. The words that they were throwing at me made me wish that I had decided to walk past the house, but I tried to not let it show that it bothered me. I wanted the younger kids to be able to have their trick-or-treating without incident. After everyone got their candy, the older boys were telling me to get out of their yard. They didn't want someone dressed as Freddy Krueger in their yard. I still thought all this was dumb, but decided to go ahead and walk away. I don't think the younger kids understood what was going on anyway, being that none of them watched scary movies. The only thing they were concerned about was getting their candy. I was just happy to get away from them as quickly as possible. But things didn't end there. Once we got to the end of the street that we were on, we turned around to go back down the other side. And when the boys saw us walking on the side of the street, they got up and they walked over to the sidewalk. There were a few more nasty comments at me, and I was wondering what the heck was going on. I had no idea why they were so intent on tormenting me this way, but they were making the whole trick-or-treat experience pretty lousy for me and the other kids. When we were down another street a while later, I heard a sound coming from behind one of the houses. I looked, and suddenly someone wearing a hockey mask came out from behind two of the houses. He also had a machete, which I was able to tell quite easily was not fake. He came rushing at me, sending the kids screaming away from me. I, on the other hand, tripped when trying to run off, and the guy trying to scare me with the mask and machete then tripped over me because he couldn't slow himself down. And for a moment or two he was laying on top of me until he started screaming himself. I don't know how I did it, but I was able to get out from under the kid. Well, I then noticed why he was screaming. He fell onto the machete he was carrying, and somehow it cut several of his fingers off. They were laying on the ground. I didn't know what to do at first, but I realized that I had to catch up with the other kids. I was supposed to be watching them. So I ran after them, as other people began running over to the kid laying on the ground screaming. I took the kids back to the car, and we drove out of there without me telling my parents what had happened, other than the fact that we were being bullied. I just didn't know how to tell them anything else that had happened. I never had anything happen to me due to this incident, though. I mean, we were all dressed in costumes, so nobody knew who we were, and the guy who came after me tried to scare me with a real machete. So, I doubt he wanted the situation looked into any further. My guess is that he got his fingers sewed back on or something, but I hope the incident will keep him from ever doing something like that ever again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget, to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.